So it's finished here at the Aviva Stadium. Ireland 13 points, France 15. Andy Dunne was watching this game for Off the Ball. Andy, overall thoughts after that? Is it similar to Wales, another case of Ireland huffing and puffing and putting as much endeavour as possible into it, but ultimately not coming out with the result and performance at the end?
Yeah, it's a hard watch at the moment. It's I suppose we present now like I think like a heavyweight boxer with a great attitude who works hard and loses on points. You know what I mean? We don't have cutting edge in our game, in our attack, really in any way, which is pretty disappointing. However, there are some positives. The line out was better today. We won all our line outs and we stole 3 of the French. There are some positives to take. The work rate, the work ethic is there. The attitude is very much, hard work, lots of endeavour. They are positives. But it's a big worry when you watch an Irish side for 80 minutes who manage 3 offloads, for example, and are just so blunt, such a lack of cutting edge in attack. It's unfortunate. It's a pattern that has continued from the tail end of the Joe Schmidt era, and now it's arguably more blunt. We're not using the clever kind of starter plays that Joe would have used with the team that gave us some level of creativity in attack. That seems to have faded from our game. So now it's lots of hard work, lots of effort, but very little return.
Yeah, and when you mention one of those plays, like there was one in the first half in particular where we did get a glimpse of one of those little almost trick plays, and it almost did result in Ireland's try with James Lowe in the corner. And it just shows the fine margins in the game, because I actually remember it vividly in the lead up to the line-out just before that. France had seen Bernard Leroux go to the sin bin for 10 minutes. Ireland got a penalty, kicked it down into the corner, and myself and you actually said this first 22 minutes, it's probably going exactly to script now for Ireland, that they'd played the territory game, they'd controlled possession, and now they just needed to make something happen. And they pulled off one of those nice little trick plays, and James Lowe, it where it looked like went over in the corner, but for the edge of his right boot just nicking the touchline. And all of a sudden, within 3 or 4 minutes, France go up the pitch. They'd done nothing for the first 28 minutes, and they score the most beautifully French try, and all of a sudden they're leading the game. Like, it just shows the margins are so small, doesn't it?
They're tiny margins, yeah. And that was, I suppose, a moment of ingenuity or creativity, and we were unfortunate. There was 1 inch, maybe less, in that James Lowe's right foot in the end, just touching that left touchline.
But eventually, when you're talking about luck that much, surely it becomes a trend then that you're thinking it isn't always down to luck, is it? Why is it always that Ireland are bemoaning that tiny bit of luck?
Yeah.
A team like France, they weren't getting any luck for the opening 27, 28 minutes, and they just decided to go up and make their own.
Yeah, and you make your own luck by attitude as well and mindset. I don't believe that the Irish players are. It's not like they don't have the skill levels. They do have the skill levels. It's the ability to pass out of the tackle is a mindset as opposed to an acquired skill over time. It's literally at this level, these top players can embrace a change in strategy like offloading overnight, in my view. This is not something that we need to work on for 3 to 4 years and develop into our game. You may get 1 or 2 of them wrong. We saw Ringrose get it wrong deep in our own territory last week. But, I mean, if you try it more times, it comes off quickly. And it's not a skill that these players will have difficulty in acquiring. It's a change or a shift in mindset and attitude. The lack of attacking threat in our game has become part of our style, and it shouldn't be part of our rugby culture. It's literally a shift in mindset, in my view. Whether the coaching is risk averse, or whether we feel we need to be we're overly prescriptive or overly dogmatic in terms of telling our players how to play. These are real questions. We saw a line break towards the tail end of the game up the left-hand side of the field with Lowe and Gibson Park, with not another Irish player in support anywhere near them. And it was as if that moment of impulse caught our players by surprise. And we can't afford to go through international rugby with long periods of lack of creativity. We need that exact approach that the French had, which was, I suppose, economic in terms of their efforts, but the ability to strike cleanly and concisely, and ultimately, cut us off a couple of times in the game the way they did and win the match.
So what is it that's happening there? Like, we'll say when a French player is making a break, or two or three French players deciding, to hell with getting back onto my wing, I want to be up here for this. Whereas if an Irish player is making a break, are the couple of players around him kind of thinking, well, I need to be out in this pod by the
exactly
from the next breakdown, and so we can set things up, and you're going to be out in the next pod after that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, I wouldn't call it an advantage of being in a quiet stadium, there's less distraction, and certainly from an observational point of view, you're often looking at an Irish support players away from the ball who are busy realigning for the next phase without being alive to that moment in time that's happening. So you might have a couple of players you'll see with their back to the ball, running to get into a better position for what they believe is about to come next down the line, which is entirely predictable, and something that's quite easy to defend. When we do get that occasional moment or glimpse of creativity, such as that mini line break up the left-hand side, most of the Irish side weren't even aware that was happening. There was 3 or 4 players who were looking to realign for what was the next prescribed phase. That, to me, is not a healthy approach to attack. There's got to be an embrace of the unknown when you go into attacking rugby, and you cannot contrive and design attack to the extent we're trying to do it. It simply doesn't work. The French moments of I suppose ingenuity were not contrived. They were just players expressing themselves, moments of skill, and it's something that I think has been coached out of Irish rugby in recent years.
Let's talk about the out halves, because by the unfortunate instance of Billy Burns having to go off for a HIA, both himself and Ross Byrne pretty much played a straight 40 each across the 80 minutes. Thoughts on the two of them? We spoke about out halves all week. There was a lot of focus on them.
Yeah, I think Billy Burns had a reasonably good first half in terms of his overall performance. He missed an easy enough penalty, and he got an easy enough penalty, so I suppose 1 from 2, 50-50 on the kicking. What he did do well, as mundane as it sounds, was he peppered the back three. He launched a lot of high balls on Brice Dulin, and
good high balls,
yeah, competitive. Chasers got a chance to compete in the air, put Brice Dulin under pressure, and it did actually. I mean, it manifested itself in a. We ended up I think it's in the first half 70-30 percentage possession and about 70-30 in territory, and really put the squeeze on that French side. Obviously, we've mentioned how they cut us open that once in that one moment, and that was enough for them. But in terms of the overall, the implementation of the strategy that was asked of him, Billy Burns did a good job in that first half. I'd like to see a different strategy, and I'd like to see a different 10 implementing a different strategy too.
Italy, 2 weeks' time. There's a break coming up. Johnny Sexton, you'd imagine, is going to be fit and available to take on Italy in Rome in a couple of weeks' time. Do you start Johnny Sexton? Do you bring in Harry Byrne, who had been brought into the squad as a bit of cover over the last couple of days? Do you stick with someone like Billy Burns or Ross Byrne even? Like, what's your thought process going into that game? Not even just about half, but do you try out some other players like Craig Casey, for example, who didn't actually get on in the 80 minutes in the end to make his debut?
Right now, I think it's a real case of if not now, when. We're in the middle of we're almost 2 years now into our 4-year World Cup cycle, and I think we absolutely need to give younger players a chance at the moment. I think Sexton will continue, and I presume will continue in terms of his captaincy and as a first choice starter. However, I think Ross Byrne, Billy Burns are not the options. I think Jack Carty is a better option, and I think we've got to look and be brave in the same way we've looked at the likes of Craig Casey coming in. Perhaps there's options there if we see a rejuvenated or fit Joey Carberry to come back involved and get more time at 10, or even a left field choice like an inexperienced Harry Byrne, or even a Jack Crowley, or a young player comes out of nowhere who's got huge talent, and you throw them in and see if they sink or swim. To me, I think the time is ripe to make some drastic changes, because our attacking game has become so stunted and stale. It's a difficult watch.
The problem now, though, is Andy Farrell in a situation where they've obviously lost their opening 2 games of this campaign.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of temptation to absolutely stack that 15 against Italy in a couple of weeks, because ultimately that game against it, that is must win, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's the perennial issue for Irish rugby. If we complain that we're not going to do well we never get past the quarter-final in the World Cup, we similarly can't complain about performances being, say, off key. If we want to make some changes, we're going to have to go through some pain, and we're going to have some poor performances, and we're going to have to blood some young players. And the Six Nations happens every single solitary year since about 1870. I mean, do we have to continuously try to win every game as a next game as a must win, or at some stage do we actually look at we've got to develop some different approach to our attack in order to have a better performance at the next World Cup? And if that's not our priority, that's fine. It's not our priority. We need to stop talking about it then. We need to try and win the next game. However, if the World Cup is a priority, we need to change what we're doing. I think the notion that we stack a team against Italy, who haven't barely won a match in 6 years, just for fear of losing, it's a sad notion. I mean, we need to be more brave than that. We need to know we can go out to Italy, win, give young players a chance, and be a bit more brave, I think, in our selections and in our skills-based approach.
And final then, quick word on France before we finish up. 2 beautiful tries. They weren't fantastic overall, I don't think, but ultimately they did show today they have what pretty much no French team over the last 10 years has had, and that is a bit of steel about them when things aren't really going too well. Absolutely.
I think it's a little worrying for the rest of the rugby world when you see a French side sticking out a tough game like that they typically would have imploded. I think they were quite disciplined in even in that last 3 to 4 minute spell in the game where Ireland had possession in the French half. It was odds on they were going to give a penalty and we were going to sneak a 16-15 win out of nowhere. But they maintained discipline. They maintained, they were behind that hindmost foot in the ruck at all times. You could see there was huge communication on the field with the players, and that is something that has not been in the French psyche for a long time, and it's a formidable mix when you see how creative they can be and how dangerous they can be in 1 or 2 moments. If they add that steeliness and determination you're speaking of, they are going to be a serious side in the next couple of years. All right, well, Andy, thanks a million for joining us this afternoon on OTB. Thanks, Neil.